People are taking up the 800-year-old craft not out of necessity, but because they find it meditative, restorative, creative, or an avenue to connect with others. Knitting is a hobby that allows one to unwind and relax, while also creating something that they can use and be proud of. To further the idea that anyone can knit, originally only men knit, and the best knitters were soldiers who would make themselves gloves, hats, and socks, according to Jessica Day George. Personally, I have been knitting for over a decade, when I was taught the skill from both my grandmother and mother, and I have been avidly knitting since then. I have knitted everything from a stuffed mouse to scarves that you see here. I have read patterns to create pieces such as the pink braided scarf, and I have also created my own patterns to make the gloves you see on the left. Knitting is much easier than it looks, and it can be learned and enjoyed by everyone. By the end of this video, you should be able to cast on, knit, and bind off. These skills will enable you to make simple projects such as a scarf. Once you learn a few more stitches, the possibilities are limitless. To start, you first have to gather the proper materials. For your first project, yarn type doesn't matter too much. Yarns come in different weights that you can find on the back. It's the number in the middle of the mock skein of yarn. This yarn is weight 6, which just means the yarn is very thick, but you can use a thinner yarn if you prefer. Next, you need a pair of needles. The most universal needle size is size 8. I'm currently using a size 8, and I would highly recommend that you buy a size 8 pair of knitting needles. You will also need a tapestry needle and a pair of scissors to finish the project. The first step is to start casting on, and the first step to casting on is creating a slip knot and sliding it over your needle and pulling it until it is tight. Then you're going to hold the tail end of the yarn against your palm with your pinky finger like so. Next, make a finger gun with your remaining fingers and wrap the yarn clockwise around it. Then take your needle under the yarn around the palm of your hand and wrap the yarn coming from the ball of yarn around the needle counterclockwise. Then drop the loop made by your finger gun over top of the needle and pull the new stitch tight onto the needle. Repeat this process until you have the desired number of stitches. For example, I will be making 20 stitches for this video. Now you will learn how to knit. Start by holding the needle with the stitches in your left hand and the empty needle in your right hand. Make sure you do not use the tail end to knit with and that the yarn you are using is coming from the ball of yarn. I will occasionally mess this up and start knitting with the tail, and I have to start the whole project over again. I always knit near the top of the needle around where the taper starts so the stitches aren't stretched out and it goes faster. Now I take the right needle and push it between the front of the first stitch and the left needle. Make sure it's the front. If you use the back, it will create twisted stitches. Next, wrap the yarn counterclockwise around your needle, just like you did when you were casting on. Then slide the right needle with the yarn under the stitch on the left needle. I like to keep the tip of the right needle against the left needle to accomplish this. After you have done that, just slide the stitch off the left needle and you have a new stitch on the right needle. Continue these steps till you get to the end of the row and simply take the needle that has all the stitches into your left hand and start the whole process over again. Once you have knit enough rows and your piece is the desired length, you will start to finish it in a process called binding off. To do this, start by knitting a normal stitch. If you make it looser, then it will be much easier to complete. Then knit a second stitch, the same as the first, remembering to keep it loose so it's easier for you to do the next step. Now this is where it starts to get tricky. Using the left needle, pick up your first knitted stitch and slide it over the second stitch and off of the needles. Now just continue knitting one stitch and slipping the older stitch over the new stitch. Once you're to the last two, do the same process, but this time cut a tail and pull the last stitch to make a larger and larger loop until the tail comes through and there's just one long tail and no loops coming off the end of your yarn. Knitting is now a craft you have learned, and with just a bit of practice you can master. You now have the skills to knit yourself whatever your heart desires.